Hello, and thank you for joining today's session on climate advocacy tools and tactics. My name is Chikondi Chavuda, and I am the Regional Advocacy Advisor for Southern Africa. Over the past 10 years, I have been working, supporting, and leading the design and the implementation of several advocacy campaigns, several advocacy strategies aimed at getting governments in Southern Africa to adopt and finance gender transformative, nutrition sensitive, climate resilient approaches to smallholder agriculture with a focus on women to increase their food and nutrition security, but also to enhance their resilience to climate change. I have picked two examples on gender transformative approaches and the climate justice campaign for some of the examples throughout the session. So the purpose of today's session is to provide an overview and brief introduction to some of the key tools that can help to ensure your advocacy efforts are indeed deliberate and effective, to help you focus your efforts on the people and tactics that can help you reach your advocacy objectives, and to outline some of the ways you can go about evaluating what's working and what's not, so that you can adjust your strategy and claim victory when all is said and done. CARE's Advocacy Handbook is based on an 8-step advocacy planning process. And the module objectives that we have will take us through this plan cycle, the implementing cycle, and also the evaluation accept. So the handbook that you've probably gone through and you will be going through throughout this journey has this 8-step planning cycle. We really don't have time to go into the details of every step, but I want to start by sharing with you some of the key tools that can help you. For starters, identify the problem that we need to solve. After identifying the problem, we need to understand the broader context surrounding your advocacy issue in relation to the problem that you're trying to solve. And then we'll try to define your goals and your objectives. And then finally, we will try to figure out who is it that you need to persuade to make that change. Later in the webinar, we will get into the tactics and implementation and monitoring and evaluation and learning, which is crucial for improvement throughout our advocacy journey. We will be sharing more resources online to help you dive into each of these steps in greater detail. So let's jump right in. The ultimate success of your advocacy strategy relies on robust planning. I cannot emphasize this enough. You need to plan and make sure that you have had an analysis that really helps you to get it to the problem that you want to change with your advocacy initiative. In advocacy, there is a tendency to jump straight into the tactics. But unless you do your homework, before you start writing your op-eds, before you start holding the meetings and events lobbying politicians, you'll find yourself wasting a lot of time and effort without a proper direction. You would think that it goes without saying, but it's really clear to be critical in identifying the problem of your advocacy efforts and really try to get to what it is that you intend to address. Knowing what your problem is will also help uncover some of its associated root problems and potential solutions. Having identified your problem, you will be able to identify what it is in your problem that can be addressed through a policy change and what needs to be addressed through programmatic aspects of your work. So you need to add advocacy issue so that the advocacy issue is related to the policy, because policy vacuum or policy implementation gap, misrepresentation, or non-application of a policy will not get you to desired change. Any issue related to a practice, such as violation of a principle or procedure by people or others in position or authority or power, but also an advocacy issue can be an issue related to a social norm. That is, you're dealing with a harmful custom, social belief, or attitude that deprives a section of the population of a right or opportunity to access either a service or means to fulfill a right. The graphic on the right here, on the right-hand side of your screen, is what we call a problem tree, and you'll find this in your advocacy handbook. This can be a very useful tool and a very useful way to brainstorm and visually display the problem, represented by the trunk of the tree and its root causes. The final step, of course, is to identify the consequences of the problem and write them as the branches of the tree. This can help you to identify the solutions to your problem, but also it helps you to express visually in terms of what policy or structural change objectives you can develop. It can also help you inform your theory of change, what it is that will happen, not to mention the key messages and the arguments you use to communicate your policy ask. So it is really important that you clearly identify your problem, because this will be your guide into the next steps. On this slide, we have the political, economic, and socio-technological and legal aspects. Before you come to this tool, where you are designing your context, understanding the context that you will be operating in, the key question you need to consider always and always is what it is that you need to be aware of in terms of the politics in that country. What is the economic stance when it comes to that country? Is it a priority amongst the people that you are going to be pushing this issue for, or it's not a priority at that moment? If it is not a priority, what it is that you need to understand in terms of the legal, the social, that can get you to make the people that you want to change to actually listen to you. So this tool, I highly recommend it. It's called the PESTLE analysis. I highly recommend that you familiarize yourself with this PESTLE analysis. And as I've said, the PESTLE stands for political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental conditions that make up the landscape within which your advocacy issue and strategy exists. The CARE Advocacy Handbook details the sorts of questions you should be seeking to answer within each category. I really find it helpful to represent your analysis in 2 columns, itemizing the positives and the negatives that you have identified within the specific aspect related to your strategy, but also getting to the needs that you need to contend under each category. This analysis will also help inform your theory of change. Just a bit of a recap, a theory of change is a testable hypothesis. So what it is that you are thinking will change through the policy action that you are pushing for. For example, if Malawi commits to 50% of its international climate finance towards adaptation, more resources will be available for approaches likely to benefit women. That is your hypothesis. This, of course, begs the question, why? Your PESTLE analysis should be able to provide the answers. For example, because adaptation is more likely than mitigation to go to women small-scale farmers, and because Malawi has related commitments in its climate change policy, but its current finance package is incoherent with those objectives, and so on and so forth. The third step in the advocacy planning and implementation cycle is about defining your goal and objectives. A goal will define what policies need to be created, changed, or enacted, and what impact will they have on poverty reduction and the lives of the people living in poverty. An objective really defines what needs to change in order to achieve this goal. Typically, you'll find that you need to influence several related changes at the objective level in order to achieve your advocacy goal. Theories of change, problem tree solutions, and the PESO analysis may be used as a basis to create the objectives for your advocacy problems. And that's why it is really important to follow the SMART rule. The quick question to consider when defining your objectives is, how important is it? Relating to what you have found out in your PESO analysis, is this something that is achievable? Is it something that is sellable? Does your organization provide added value to you pushing for this? And does it fit with our organization values and goals? Finally, it will help you in a myriad ways to ensure your goal and objectives are specific, measurable, achievable, time-bound, and relevant. Here is an example of the goal and objectives we initially established when we were doing the Gender Justice for Climate Justice Advocacy Strategy. I mentioned at the outset of this session that I'll be using as an example. Note that these are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. I say initially because over the course of implementation, circumstance changed. That's why we need to have our mirror in order. We gained intelligence and tested, asked, and found other more achievable ways of creating accountability, for example, than by getting the government to publish its data more transparently. That can work for another policy goal, but not for this one. Then we took it upon ourselves that we need to publish biannual review reports and then also get to the studies that we have found of why this matters, so that we then force the government to change the way it is having the representation of women within negotiations, but also having these marginalized groups be part of the process of coming up with a position for COPs and ensuring that the farmers' voices are part and parcel of this initiative. So these are just some of the objectives that followed this specific goal, where we really secured the formal inclusion of gender-related issues as a policy priority, which led to more numbers of women attending the UNFCCC negotiations from Malawi. Now that you've identified your problem, the broader context, you have identified what your goal and objectives are, it is really crucial now to identify who will make that change. And these processes that we have gone through, identifying the problem, coming up with the PESO analysis, have a value in identifying who actually has the power. Because when you are doing your PESO analysis, you identify what legal frameworks are existing, which ministry or which stakeholder is actually the right one to make the change that you want, because you have done a thorough analysis of identifying the problem exists and organizations that have done the work before and those that have not, and then also trying to identify what it is that you want them to do. So on this one, it's about the stakeholder analysis, and really it's about identifying who makes a change. So here again, you need to be specific. In policy advocacy, specificity matters more than anything. So you want to be specific on the individual people or positions of power and influencing that are your targets. You can't target the environmental ministry, for example. It's way too big and amorphous. But you can target the minister, her policy director, for example, or you can even target the director within her department. It is about who has the power. You need to identify the people buying figure out whether they are primary or secondary targets. And by primary targets, we are talking about those with decision-making power, and they have power to make the change, like the minister, for example. Secondary targets, on the other hand, are those who can influence those who have power. They are power holders. That is, they are people who have influence over the primary targets. And then as they have the power over the primary targets, they can influence, for example, the minister's advisors, her constituents, for example, the media. If it is the president, it can even be the presidential advisors. This can be mapped out according to a power analysis. You need to do a power analysis when doing the stakeholder analysis. Ask yourself questions like, who could champion the issue? What influence do they have? What motives do they have that I can tap into to get their attention? This will really help you to unpack each of your advocacy targets' influence and interest in relation to your advocacy goal. Focus your energy in the right direction and determine the sequence of your actions you need to take to get to your objective. It will not make sense for you to be targeting somebody who is a secondary target who has no influence over a primary target. You need to really do your power analysis. Change takes power, and power is held in people. So target those people clearly. The CARE Advocacy Handbook contains several types of power analysis, and I would encourage you to go through them, and as they provide a guidance for undertaking such analysis. Okay, now we're going to skip step 5 and 6 in the advocacy planning cycle, which talks about what are our policy ask and core messages, but also what resources do we have. Because at this moment, we want to now get to what it is that you are asking. And I believe that when you do your reading, you will understand what it is that you need in terms of getting the resources and also getting to the policy ask and key messages. This is very important in identifying resources that you have for your advocacy strategy, and jump into some of the most creative and exciting parts of doing climate change advocacy. That is putting your analysis and strategy into action. All that you have done, it really needs to go into action. So let's jump right into step number 7, which is talking about what is our plan of action and implementation. So on our plan of action and implementation, we want to talk about the tactics. So here, tactics are really the types of activities that support your strategy. They are often chosen based on the level of risk, and you guide to understand your level of risk. When you have done your personal analysis, you will choose it based on their cost, but also their chances of success in the existing political environment that you're working in. Advocacy strategies usually have to be adapted over time. That's why I say that we had to change our goal as we went with time, because while it is important to have a sense of the range of activities to be undertaken, it's also important to keep a flexible activity schedule. You need to be flexible. Things are always changing. You need to be innovative and seize opportunities that may emerge as critical for successful advocacy, even if it means changing your original plan. Possible advocacy tactics as activities might include analysis and research, lobbying decision makers through meetings, blogs, coalition building, comms and media work, and campaigns. For our work of including women farmers within our COP28 and our COP positions really generally, we focused on building and maintaining a strong relationship with the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. That was our tactic. We also acted as a partner to the government, and still do when we are being asked specific tasks requested by the government, and we ensure that we execute them effectively. Then we also provide feedback to the government that might not always align with the government's position, because we have been entrusted with a position that is working towards the same goal with the government. But also combining advocacy and our policy expertise with program technical expertise. For example, having your gender person include their research and evaluations that they have done over time, and showing a clear case of why it is important to have small-scale farmers as part of your COP negotiations, and also the policy documents that get formulated after that, such as the National Determined Contributions or the National Adaptation Plan, depending on context. It was really important for us to have the inclusivity aspect of women farmers, because during our problem analysis, we identified that because women were not involved in identifying the real key issues that could be presented in our position, we were losing out on getting to the real needs of the people that can be addressed through policy change. You can also do this through public education. So you have the press releases, sharing advocacy stories, developing programs on radio or TV, writing open ends, Twitter chats, X chats. And then also you can do this through capacity building, where you are strengthening activists and civil society groups. You are facilitating participation and voices of women so that their value is seen. And then you're also training social monitors. You also do some internal learning and research as a tactic, where you produce policy briefs and position papers. You do shadow reports, for example, but also you develop evidence to support other influencing efforts. You also do participation of impact groups in advocacy strategies by having maybe pledge cards, having written official statements, participatory assessments, but also public speaking at events where appropriate. You cannot do this alone. You really need associations. So coalitions is very important as you're doing your advocacy. So you need to be in movements, you need to be within coalitions or networks, so that they can also act as your secondary target, even when you're not there, so that they are carrying your key messages through and through. You also need to have informal influencing during receptions, for example, among personal contacts, working groups. You have UN cluster groups, parliamentary committees. Those are some of the groups that you need to be a part of to ensure that you are driving the change together. We also have these policy briefs and letters, as I've said, but also face-to-face meetings. When you're going into these meetings, you need to be very clear what your target is, who your secondary target are, and how the secondary targets can influence your primary targets. In CARE, we also use scorecard reports that help us to identify how service delivery can be enhanced. And it's very clear information that can be used both by secondary targets and primary targets. But we also ensure advocacy impact groups are aware of their rights and ensure that our advocacy targets are held accountable for meeting the rights of the impact group. We also have public mobilization. So organizing marches, demonstrations, depending on the context, but also petitions, but also organizing some parallel events. It's really not going to be a good use of your time and energy to just start producing advocacy assets or products and putting them out there. You might face resistance. So it's very important that at every stage of the implementation of your strategy, you need to make sure that you're thinking about which of your advocacy targets you're trying to influence with each tactic. Be very intentional. The 5 C's that we're just going to go through now can also help you reflect on how individuals will react or will respond to your call for change. You need to be prepared and plan an approach for each of the 5 C's. So for the 5 C's, we have the champions. And the champions may be carefully used to promote the issue. They are those who are prepared to stick their necks out for you. These are people that you have mapped out that they will run with an idea and they own what will happen. Tempting as it is to embrace their enthusiasm, you need to treat champions cautiously. For one thing, champions generally champion everything. Their enthusiasm could give you a false impression of how everyone else is feeling. And champions won't question you closely on the merits of your proposal. You need to serve some challenges to make sure that your idea has some rigor. You need to give champions something practical to do, which absorbs their energy. Be careful about using them as advocates. They are likely to be treated with skepticism by others. Then we have the chasers. These usually are 15 to 20% of the total population. Chasers don't immediately respond positively to your proposal for change. At the end of a briefing, they look around to see who has signed up. They are really influenced by others. They want to discuss your idea with others before forming a judgment, and will generally look to a key opinion maker or a trigger person for guidance. The great advantage of chasers is they give you a more accurate view of how your proposal is going down. When they join, you're making progress, and once committed, you're sure they will stay. The challenge here is often about convincing the right trigger person to convince these chasers. Then we have converts. These form 30 to 50% of the total population. Converts are the biggest single group in your change audience. They listen in silence to the proposed change and don't ask questions. Converts want solid evidence in favor of the change in order to come on board. Converts have two advantages. First, bringing them on board tips a sizable majority of people into the mostly positive camp and ensures your change proposal will be adopted. Second, although they can be slow to adopt change, they are equally slow to let it go. Once they're convinced, you have momentum. The main disadvantage with converts is that they take so long to come around that your initiative sometimes may lose momentum. Think about and try to address converts' concerns before launching a change process. That way you'll be able to bring them on board more quickly. Try producing a list of fact sheets in advance. It shows you are thinking about the people as well as the organization. And this really comes about easily when you have done your personal analysis very clearly. Then we have the challenges. The challenges as well, they are 15% of your total population. And for the challenges, this is where you need to focus your energy and make sure that they are on board. They ask difficult questions initially and then continue to do so. Their approach is to confront and be awkward because they have a strong stake in the outcome. It's a personality trait, not a personal attack. So don't treat it as an attack, because challenging is a personality trait that is unlikely to be convinced. So challengers need a lot of time to make sure that they change. And when they change, the change will be good. What's more important is that others will be watching how well you handle the challenges interventions. Take this as an opportunity to be rigorous in your thinking and address issues others may have even had before they come up. Then we have the change phobics. These as well, you need to focus your energy there because they have 5 to 10% of your total advocacy audience. They will not ever be convinced. They can slow you down or even derail your change. They cause dissent and are essentially immovable. Change phobics are tough. Treat them fairly and move on. When you lead your change process, you will need to consider how you might deal with these 5 C's by doing a proper power analysis. So here are some of the examples that we have used within CARE on some of the advocacy tactics that were deployed with some of the work and the negotiations, but also ensuring that we have accountability, questioning whether the government is doing everything it should through the open ed, and also making sure the op-eds are stimulating public discourse to activate the chasers and then sway away converts. It's useful to think about who is your best messenger is. Do your advocacy targets need to hear the message from you or maybe someone else with a different kind of credibility? Think about it. Do you want a technical expert from the program team to carry the byline or your executive director, for example? When you're doing a letter to the editors, for example, in community newspapers, be very careful because they can be a helpful way of showing that regular folks support your policy ask and influences others. And that is not just a pet project of another INGO or another grouping activist, because you have this buy-in of your people and those that have influence showing up in letters to the editors, showing positive response to your advocacy issue. Reports can also be a great way of presenting the evidence that support your policy ask. So it's really important to have this on board. So now that we have identified how we can do our tactics, and really it can vary from country to country and advocacy issue to advocacy issue, we now delve into how we do the final steps of this process of how we can monitor and evaluate our progress. Measuring advocacy is always difficult in the following ways. Trying to establish the cause and effect is quite difficult. Measuring agency and empowerment, but also reporting on changing objectives based on changing opportunities in complex environments. Justifying continuing successful interventions while working on longer-term social changes, but also determining the timing of when to evaluate outcomes and impacts, given the long-term horizon of higher level changes. So these are real challenges that we find when monitoring and evaluation our policy changes. Fortunately, for CARE, we have developed a number of tools for our meal for advocacy in several languages. We have the peers tool and the AIR tool and the advocacy tracker. For the advocacy tracker, it measures day-to-day impact that we are making, with the outcome level in mind. Whilst our AIR tool, which is the advocacy impact and reporting tool, this one measures the impact that we have achieved over a longer term. And our peers data is a system that we now take on board everything that we have done, whether it is through the advocacy tracker, and this is our system of reporting annually on the progress that we are making on different projects and interventions. The advocacy tracker and the AIR tool are one of the most used tools that I use to frequently evaluate both the quantitative and the qualitative impacts, but also check the progress of my advocacy work. Most of you are aware of peers tool if you're within CARE, as it provides a comprehensive meal system that we are quite familiar with. Together, they offer a pretty good snapshot of how you're doing. Apart from those, we do have all these that are there that we have mentioned. So maybe as we now wrap up this session, I would like to let you know that as we are doing all these tools, these are some of the tools that I have mentioned about, and these are the challenges that we were just talking about as some of the difficulties in measuring impacts. And if you do have others as well, please share in your group work so that we can learn from each other. We have the Power Tool, which was developed for low-cost advocacy. And here, this tool consists of multiple tools that is used to influence a simple meal system to measure and track progress towards your goal. We have the Advocacy Tracker that is a template that has questions that then documents your process and then how did you get to the win. But you can also develop some case studies that can inform your programming. And then finally, we have the peer system that is a comprehensive tool that we use to track all our work as we want to move on. For more guidance on Mail for Advocacy, you will find a click. When you click this link, you'll be able to get to that advocacy goal. So more of these resources can be found in these slides. I have mentioned of the Advocacy Handbook. We have talked about the packages in advocacy training that you can use. We've talked about the 5 C's that are really important when you're mapping out who you put your effort on when doing your policy change. And then we have a guide from Oxfam on doing a power analysis. And then we have also evidence that is used to influence policy from Oxfam experience, but also I'll add in the AIR tool that was documented from the COP28 position of having women's inclusion in policy discourse when it comes to the UNFCCC process and making the process as inclusive as possible by having women farmers part of the table. So thank you very much for your attentiveness throughout this session. If you do have questions, I look forward to our live session where we can delve deeper into expanding this exciting component of taking your problem to the solution and then how you get to that. Do take a look out for the materials that have been shared that would guide you to understand further this 8-step process that we have talked about, but also further delve into some aspects that we have left out. Thank you and have a great day.